I was standing barefoot in a narrow alley, the cold seeping through cracked concrete and straight into my bones, when my mother-in-law pointed at a pile of trash in the corner and laughed. "That is where you belong?" she said. "Maybe a beggar will pick you up?" Her words were sharp, precise, practiced, like she had rehearsed them long before tonight. My name is Lillian Moore. Less than 10 minutes earlier I had signed divorce papers that left me with nothing. No home, no savings, no dignity, just shaking hands in a silence so loud it felt violent. Behind her, the apartment door slammed shut, the lock clicked. Clean, final. They thought this was the end of me. I sat there in the darkness, arms wrapped around myself, trying to understand how a 5-year marriage could end with someone pointing at garbage and calling it my future. I had loved their son, I had cooked in that kitchen, cleaned that house, defended that family when no one else would. And now, in their eyes, I was disposable. A few windows above the alley flickered on, then off again. People heard, people saw. No one came. The air smelled like wet cardboard and old food. It struck me then how humiliation has a smell. My phone lay a few feet away, its screen cracked, but glowing faintly. I stared at it, fighting a promise I made years ago. Do not call them. Prove you can survive on your own. But that night, pride would not keep me alive. With numb fingers, I picked up the phone and dialed the one number I had sworn never to use. The call rang once, twice. Then a familiar voice answered. "Miss Moore, where are you?" 30 minutes later, headlights flooded the alley, and everything they believed they had destroyed began to rise. 1 hour earlier, I was still inside the apartment I once believed was my home. The living room lights were too bright. The air felt tight, like it was waiting for something ugly to happen. I remember noticing how quiet it was, no television, no music, just the sound of my own breathing. Caleb stood across from me, his jaw clenched, his eyes cold in a way I had never seen before. Not anger, not pain, calculation. "We're done, Lillian," he said flatly. "Sign the papers." I looked at the documents in his hand, my name printed neatly beside his. Divorce. Waiver, no assets, no claims, no questions. I laughed nervously, thinking this had to be some kind of threat, some cruel argument that would pass. "What are you talking about? This came out of nowhere," I said. "We need to talk." That was when I noticed his mother, Doris, standing near the hallway, arms crossed. Watching, not shocked, not confused, waiting. Vanessa was there too, leaning against the wall, scrolling on her phone like this was entertainment. This was not a fight, I realized. This was a meeting. "You have nothing to talk about," Doris said calmly. "You've outlived your usefulness." The words hit harder than shouting ever could. Caleb stepped closer. "You knew this was coming, you just didn't want to accept it." I didn't understand. I had spent 5 years building my life around this family. Adjusting. Enduring. Believing that effort would eventually become love. When I hesitated, Doris sighed impatiently. "If you don't sign, we'll make this very uncomfortable for you," she said. "You don't want problems. You don't want people talking." Vanessa finally looked up from her phone and smirked. "Trust me, you don't want people talking." That was the moment something inside me shifted. They weren't emotional, they weren't reactive, they were organized. This wasn't a breakdown. It was an eviction. With shaking hands, I signed. Not because I agreed, but because in that room, surrounded by people who had already erased me, I understood one thing very clearly. I was never a wife to them. I was a placeholder. And my time was up. For 5 years, I told myself this was what marriage looked like when you chose love over comfort. I had grown up surrounded by structure, order, and expectations. When I married Caleb, I walked away from all of that willingly. I wanted a simple life, a normal life, one built on effort, not privilege. At least that was the story I told myself. I learned quickly how the house operated. Doris liked her meals cooked a certain way. Breakfast had to be ready by 7, dinner by 6. If something was wrong, she didn't complain. She simply went silent, which somehow felt worse. Vanessa treated the apartment like a hotel. She slept late, came home later, and never lifted a finger. When I asked for help, she would smile and say, "You're better at this stuff than me." Caleb watched it all and said nothing. At first, I thought he was tired. Work stress, I told myself. Pressure. Every marriage has seasons. So I tried harder. I stopped buying things for myself. I took on extra chores. I learned to apologize even when I wasn't sure what I had done wrong. When Doris criticized the way I dressed, I changed my clothes. When she complained that I wasn't warm enough, I tried to be quieter, softer, smaller. I believed love was endurance. When people asked if I was happy, I smiled and said yes, because admitting otherwise felt like admitting failure. But slowly something strange happened. No matter how much I gave, the rules kept changing. What pleased them yesterday annoyed them today. What was enough last month became insufficient the next. I was praised in private and dismissed in public, trusted with responsibility, denied respect. And when I couldn't give them the one thing they wanted most, a child, the warmth disappeared entirely. Caleb stopped touching me. Doris stopped pretending. Vanessa stopped hiding her contempt. Still I stayed. Because leaving felt like proving them right? Looking back now, I understand something I didn't then. Love does not require you to erase yourself to be accepted. And any place that demands your silence in exchange for belonging was never a home to begin with. The alley was quiet again after the door slammed shut. Not peaceful, empty. I sat there with my knees pulled to my chest, trying to slow my breathing. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't feel my fingers anymore. That was when I noticed the faint glow on the ground beside me. My phone. The screen was cracked, the corner shattered, but it was still on. Still alive, unlike the version of me that had walked into that apartment an hour earlier. I stared at it for a long time. 5 years ago, before I left my family, I had been given one instruction. It wasn't angry. It wasn't dramatic. It was calm and final. If you ever reach a point where you truly have nowhere else to go, make the call. But only then. I had sworn I would never need it. Through bad days, lonely nights, quiet humiliation, I told myself I was fine. I told myself independence meant never asking for help. But that night, sitting on cold concrete with nowhere to sleep and no one to call, pride felt ridiculous. Survival mattered more. I picked up the phone. My fingers were stiff. The screen blurred as tears filled my eyes. I dialed the number I knew by heart. It rang once. Twice. Each ring made my chest tighten. Then the call connected. "Lillian?" a familiar voice said gently. "Where are you?" I broke. Words wouldn't come out at first. Only sobs. I pressed the phone against my ear like it was the only solid thing left in the world. I told him the address. I told him I was outside. I told him I had nowhere to go. "You're not alone," he said without hesitation. "Stay where you are. I'm coming." The call ended. I lowered the phone into my lap and stared at the dark street. For the first time that night, I wasn't waiting to be discarded. I was waiting to be found. I didn't know how much time passed after that call. Minutes stretched strangely in the cold. The street felt unreal, like a place I no longer belonged to. I remember thinking that if no one came, I might simply disappear there quietly, without anyone noticing. Then the darkness changed. At first it was just a glow at the end of the alley, a thin line of light that didn't belong there. I lifted my head, unsure if I was imagining it. The sound came next. Low, controlled, not rushed, the kind of engine sound you only hear in movies. Headlights flooded the alley all at once, turning night into harsh white daylight. One car. Then another. Then more. They moved slowly, deliberately, like they knew exactly where they were going. Windows in the surrounding buildings lit up again. This time, no one turned them off. The cars stopped a few feet away from me. Doors opened. Men stepped out, calm and alert, forming a quiet barrier between me and the rest of the world. Then I saw him. "Mr. Bennett." He walked toward me without hesitation, took off his coat, and wrapped it around my shoulders before I could even stand. "You're safe now, Lillian," he said softly. Something inside me finally gave way. Not fear, not shame. Relief. He helped me to my feet, shielding me as I was guided toward the first car. No one stared. No one spoke. The silence felt respectful, protective. As the door closed behind me and warmth filled the car, I looked back through the window. The same alley. The same trash pile. But the story had already changed. They thought they had left me with nothing. They never imagined who would come looking for me. The car moved smoothly through the empty streets, the city lights blurring past the window like they belonged to another life. Inside it was warm, quiet, safe. I sat wrapped in Mr. Bennet's coat, my hands slowly thawing, my body still trembling from shock more than cold. No one rushed me with questions. No one asked me to explain myself. That alone felt unfamiliar. We drove north, away from the city, into roads lined with trees and long iron gates. I recognized the path before I saw the house. I hadn't been there in 5 years. The estate lights were already on when we arrived. The front door stood open, as if it had been waiting. And there he was. My grandfather, Richard Hale, standing instead of sitting, leaning on his cane, eyes fixed on me. He looked older than I remembered. Thinner. But the moment our eyes met, something in his face broke. He didn't ask why I had come back. He didn't say I told you so. He took one step forward and said only this. What did they do to you? That was all it took. Everything I had been holding inside collapsed at once. I crossed the room, knelt in front of him without thinking, and cried harder than I ever had in my adult life. I was wrong, I said through tears. I thought I could fix it. I thought love was enough. He placed a trembling hand on my shoulder and shook his head. You don't kneel in this house, Lillian? Not ever? He helped me up, held my face gently, and studied me the way only someone who truly knows you can. You're home, he said. That's what matters. Then his voice changed. Calm, precise, controlled. Mr. Bennet. Eh? Yes, sir. I want everything on that family, financial records, property, employment history, accounts, every detail, leave nothing untouched. Understood. As Mr. Bennet turned to leave, my grandfather looked back at me. Rest now, he said quietly. Tomorrow we find out the truth. And for the first time since the alley, I felt something stronger than pain. I felt protected. The next morning I sat across from my grandfather in his study, a thick folder placed between us on the desk. He did not open it right away. He waited until I was fully awake, dressed, and steady enough to listen. Some truths are heavy, he said. It's better to meet them standing. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I was ready. He slid the folder toward me. Mr. Bennet had worked through the night. What you're about to read explains more than you might want to know. I opened the first page. Caleb Moore. Employment history. Business registrations. Financial disclosures. At first glance it looked ordinary. Then I reached the bank statements. My name was there. Not once, not twice, month after month. Money had been transferred regularly from an account under my name into accounts controlled by Caleb and his mother. I felt my stomach drop. I never sent this, I said quietly. You didn't, my grandfather replied. That account is a trust your parents created for you before they died. Modest by our standards, but enough to live comfortably. It was meant to teach independence, not indulgence. My mind raced backward. Caleb insisting he handled the finances. Caleb telling me his business was covering everything. Caleb reassuring me that money was tight but manageable. I turned the page. The company he claimed was successful had been bleeding money for years. Losses disguised as investments. Loans stacked on top of loans. The apartment we lived in wasn't paid for by his success. It was paid for by me? Without my knowledge, without my consent. I felt sick. So he wasn't supporting the family, I whispered. He was using me to support them. My grandfather nodded. And when your usefulness ended, so did the arrangement. I closed the folder slowly. In that moment, something very important shifted inside me. I had thought I was weak for staying. I had thought I was naive for believing. But the truth was simpler and colder. I wasn't foolish. I was targeted. Caleb didn't destroy me because I failed as a wife. He destroyed me because he had already taken everything he could. And once I understood that, the shame I had been carrying for years no longer belonged to me. It belonged to them. By midday, the house no longer felt like a refuge. It felt like a command center. Phones rang quietly in other rooms. Staff moved with purpose, not panic. No one raised their voice. Nothing felt rushed, yet everything was happening at once. My grandfather stood by the window, looking out at the grounds, his posture calm and unmoved. "You can stay hidden," he said without turning around. "No one would blame you after what you've been through." I understood what he was offering: time, privacy, silence. But something inside me had changed since the alley. If I stayed quiet now, I would be letting their version of me stand. "No," I said, my voice surprised even me. "I'm done being erased." He turned, studying me carefully. Then he nodded once. "So be it." Within hours, a brief statement was released. No drama, no accusations, just facts. Lillian Moore had returned to the Hale family. She would be assuming a leadership role within the organization in the coming months. Nothing more. Nothing less. That was all it took. Messages flooded in: business partners, investors, media inquiries. And somewhere across the city, I knew a very different house had gone silent. Caleb and his family believed they had thrown away a powerless woman. They had no idea they had just severed ties with the person whose name quietly sat behind the money that fed them. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt clarity. For the first time in 5 years, I was standing in my own name again. And whatever came next, it would happen in the open. Not as someone's wife. Not as someone's burden. But as myself. The first move was quiet. No shouting, no confrontation, no dramatic phone calls. Just paperwork. My grandfather believed in something very simple. If someone built their life on lies, you don't need revenge. You just remove the lies and let gravity do the rest. The legal team reviewed every contract tied to Caleb's company, slowly, carefully, by the book. It didn't take long. Deadlines missed, clauses violated, numbers that didn't add up. A house of cards disguised as a business. 2 major contracts were terminated within 24 hours. Perfectly legal, perfectly clean. At the same time, the company's outstanding loans were purchased quietly through a third party. No announcements, no warnings. Just a change in ownership. Caleb didn't even realize what had happened at first. He only knew that the calls from banks had changed in tone. Polite became firm, firm became urgent. He tried to negotiate, tried to stall, tried to charm his way out like he always had. It didn't work. Because this time he wasn't dealing with people he could manipulate. He was dealing with consequences. I watched the reports come in without emotion. This wasn't about hurting him. This was about stopping the bleeding. About reclaiming what had been taken and making sure it could never be taken again. The strangest part was how calm I felt. No anger, no rush. Just a quiet understanding that when you stop protecting someone who has been using you, their world collapses on its own. And Caleb's world had just begun to tilt. The collapse didn't begin with bankruptcy. It began with silence. Caleb's phone stopped ringing with friendly voices. Meetings were canceled without explanation. Promises he had relied on for years suddenly vanished. At home, the atmosphere changed just as quickly. Doris no longer spoke with confidence. Her complaints turned sharp, desperate. She paced the apartment, replaying every decision, every imagined insult. "How could you let this happen?" she snapped at Caleb. "After everything we did for you." Vanessa fared no better. The future she bragged about online began to crumble. Invitations stopped. Messages went unanswered. The people she had laughed with moved on without her. Their house, once filled with noisy certainty, became a place of blame. Caleb tried to hold it together. He made calls late into the night, pacing, whispering promises he could no longer keep. He told them it was temporary, that he had a plan. But plans require leverage. And Caleb had none left. That was when he called me. I watched his name light up my phone and felt nothing, no fear, no anger, just distance. His voice was unrecognizable, soft, shaken, almost pleading. "Lillian, please, we need to talk." I let the silence stretch. Whatever control he thought he still had slipped away in that pause. For the first time, he understood what it felt like to speak and not be heard. And in that quiet space, the family that once stood united against me began to turn inward. The house that had pushed me out was now collapsing from the inside. I didn't go looking for more damage. The truth came to me on its own. As the investigation continued, Mr. Bennett brought me another file. Thinner than the first, but heavier in a different way. Caleb wasn't just dishonest with money, he said carefully. He was consistent. Inside were names, messages, photos, patterns. There were other women. Not affairs driven by emotion, but connections built with intention. Each woman served a purpose. Access, status, opportunity. When one stopped being useful, another appeared. I felt something shift again, but this time it wasn't shock. It was clarity. I agreed to meet them, not as an accuser, not as a rival, just as someone who had finally seen the whole picture. Each conversation followed the same rhythm. At first they defended him, said he was misunderstood, said he was ambitious, said he loved them. Then the evidence came out. The half-truths, the reused promises, the identical phrases copied and pasted from one relationship to the next. One woman stared at the table and whispered, "He said that to me too." Another laughed bitterly. I thought I was special. None of them were foolish, they were targeted, just like I had been. We didn't form an alliance out of anger. We formed it out of recognition. Manipulation thrives in isolation. It survives when victims believe they are alone. Once the pattern was visible, it lost its power. I didn't ask them to fight for me. I asked them to stop protecting someone who had never protected them. And when they did, Caleb's carefully constructed image began to fracture everywhere at once. Not with noise, with truth. I agreed to one interview. Just one. Not to tell my story in anger, and not to shame anyone publicly, but to place the truth where it could no longer be twisted. The setting was simple. No dramatic lighting, no music, just a chair, a camera, and questions asked without hostility. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I spoke slowly, carefully, the way someone does when they are no longer trying to convince anyone of anything. I talked about how easy it is to confuse endurance with love, how often women are told to be patient, understanding, forgiving, even when the cost is their own dignity. I explained the financial manipulation, the emotional erosion, the way control hides behind charm. I didn't mention Caleb's name more than once. I didn't need to. Facts don't require repetition. At the end of the interview, I announced something that mattered far more to me than reputation or revenge. I was establishing a foundation to provide legal guidance and emotional support for people trapped in toxic marriages and financial abuse. Not as charity. As accountability. The response was immediate. Messages from strangers, quiet thank yous, stories that sounded painfully familiar. And just as quickly, Caleb's remaining support disappeared. Business partners distanced themselves. Friends went silent. Invitations stopped. Not because I attacked him, but because the truth made association uncomfortable. When the interview ended and the cameras turned off, I felt lighter than I had in years. I hadn't destroyed anyone. I had simply stopped carrying a lie that was never mine to hold. The final mistake didn't come from Caleb. It came from his mother. Desperation changes people. It strips away logic and replaces it with impulse. Doris had lost everything she believed defined her worth: money, status, control. And when people like her lose control, they don't retreat quietly. Late one evening, Mr. Bennett called me. His voice was calm, but the words were not. "She's gone," he said. "Left the apartment. Acting erratically. We're tracking her." I felt a chill I hadn't felt since the alley. Minutes later, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. "If you want him safe, come alone." No signature, no explanation. Just fear sharpened into a threat. I didn't panic. Panic was what she expected. Instead, I listened. Authorities were already moving, quietly, carefully. The goal wasn't confrontation. It was containment. I followed instructions exactly, drove where I was told, said nothing unnecessary. Every step measured. When I saw her, she didn't look powerful. She looked small. Unraveling. "You took everything from me," she hissed. "You ruined my family." I met her eyes and spoke the truth she had avoided her entire life. "You did that yourself?" That was when she realized something had shifted. That intimidation no longer worked. That fear no longer lived where it used to. Before she could react, voices filled the space, lights cut through the dark. It ended without spectacle. No shouting, no struggle. Just the quiet sound of consequences finally catching up. Later, as I sat wrapped in a blanket, Mr. Bennet spoke gently. "This is over, Lillian." And for the first time I believed him. Not because they were gone, but because I was no longer running. The days that followed were quiet in a way I had never experienced before. No alarms, no accusations, no need to explain myself to anyone. Legal matters unfolded without drama. Paperwork replaced panic, timelines replaced chaos. The outcomes were firm, final, and fair. I didn't attend every meeting. I didn't need to. For the first time, I trusted the process without feeling the urge to control it. That alone felt like healing. What surprised me most was not relief but space. Space to think clearly. Space to sleep without tension curling in my chest. Space to notice how tired I had been for years without realizing it. I took walks in the mornings, read books I had abandoned, relearned what silence sounded like when it wasn't punishment. People asked if I felt victorious. I didn't. I felt finished. There is a difference. Victory looks outward. It needs witnesses. Closure happens quietly. It doesn't announce itself. It simply arrives when there is nothing left to prove. I wasn't rebuilding my life from ruins. I was returning to it from exile. And in that calm, I finally understood something simple and essential. Leaving wasn't my failure. Staying silent for so long had been. Now, I had my voice back. And I intended to use it carefully. People still ask me if this was a story about revenge. It wasn't. It was a story about permission. The permission to stop explaining yourself to people who benefit from misunderstanding you. The permission to walk away without giving one last chance. The permission to choose dignity over endurance. For a long time, I believed strength meant staying, being patient, absorbing discomfort so others could remain comfortable. I was wrong. Real strength is clarity. It is recognizing when love has turned into control, when compromise has turned into erasure, when silence has turned into harm. Caleb and his family didn't fall because I attacked them. They fell because I stepped aside and let the truth stand on its own. That is the part no one warns you about. When you stop protecting someone who is hurting you, they collapse under the weight of who they really are. And you don't need to push. You just need to stop holding them up. If you're listening to this and something in your chest feels tight, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not weak for being kind. You are not foolish for believing. And you are not failing because you're tired. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is leave quietly and rebuild without asking for permission. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like, share, and comment where you're listening from. Your voice matters more than you think. And if you're standing at the edge of a decision you've been avoiding, remember this. Walking away is not the end. For me, it was the beginning.